Hello, my name is Danielle Wood, and welcome to the 5th edition of Serving Society with Space Data, hosted by the Secure World Foundation and the Space Enabled Research Group. We are honored today to bring you our next discussion, and we'll be speaking about ways that we are connecting data from satellite Earth observation and astronomy to connect to Sustainable Development Goals. Over the last few months, we've been talking about several of the Sustainable Development Goals, and today's edition focuses on SDG number 8, highlighting opportunities for decent work and economic growth. Our goal is to engage a multi-sector audience in discussions that contribute to better outcomes in critical fields around the world, such as energy, food security, health, and governance. These events have been held twice a month, and we bring together experts working in companies, nonprofits, academia, and government. Each of the people we highlight will share real-world stories of their experiences, showing recent developments in technology and showing opportunities and challenges for expanding the use of satellite data and services to progress toward the world's key problems. This series considers ongoing work by a variety of actors, and we have a special focus on the development and humanitarian sectors. We also see today the role of government and organizations such as entrepreneurial companies. In each webinar, we'll present a group of topical experts, and we also collect data from all of those who are participating. So we welcome every participant, and thank you for joining us virtually today. We'll have live poll questions and time for audience Q&A. After each event, we also ask you to share your thoughts. We don't just want this to be a one-time interaction. Our goal is also to learn more about the work that you're doing. So we will send participants a post-seminar survey to gain insights from your work, what challenges you're facing, and the projects that you're pursuing. Based on this review and what we learned through the Q&A here, we'll also be producing a white paper highlighting the opportunities and challenges to increase the use of space data for the Sustainable Development Goals. So our events aim to share knowledge about the utilization of space technologies, especially for data-driven applications related to decision-making. We wanted to demonstrate the work that's currently going on and highlight the opportunity for more adoption of space-related data. So let me introduce our discussion today and highlight today's panelists. One moment. I'm so thankful for the people that are joining us today. It's going to be an exciting discussion. And I think what you'll see is that our discussion will cover several realms in terms of the type of scope that we're considering. Today, we're focusing on SDG number 8. And number 8 highlights this statement. We want to promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. Certainly in this era of a global pandemic, the need for supporting decent work opportunities is felt with new urgency. And that's true in many places around the world. We'll hear today from examples from several parts of the world. As I introduce today's speakers, I considered that some of their work directly relates to certain of the SDG 8 targets. In particular, today we'll talk about SDG 8.3, promoting development-oriented policies to support productive activities, decent job creation, entrepreneurship, creativity, and innovation, and encouraging the formalization and growth of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. SDG Target 8.5 highlights by 2030 seeking to achieve full and productive employment and decent work for all women and men, and also considers people with disabilities. 8.9 highlights the idea that by 2030, we want to devise and implement policies to promote sustainable tourism and create jobs and promote local culture and products. Throughout today's discussion, I'll be asking both participants virtually as well as our panelists to reflect on these 3 SDGs. Let me introduce that we'll use the tool of Slido. And you can go ahead now and access slido.com. And you can be able to see that soon I'll be asking you a question to highlight your view on which of these SDG 8 targets are most relevant to your work. So I'll introduce that in a few moments. But for now, if you go to slido.com and enter hashtag SDG8, you'll be able to see our poll question and start to get ready to answer those. Let me introduce the opportunity. And I want to make sure you're aware of how to give this direct input. So you can use your mobile device or computer. And based on your responses, I'll later use that to shape our discussion. It's my pleasure to introduce our panelists to you, and we'll be hearing from people discussing at 3 different levels. First, we'll hear from Dr. Bruno Sanchez Andrade Nuno. He serves as a principal scientist at Microsoft AI for Earth. He has also worked in the innovation labs at the World Bank, as well as Mapbox and Satellogic. With this great experience, he's been able to work across several different aspects of the space information value chain, and he'll give us a global perspective today, highlighting the high-level strengths and weaknesses of using satellite data and other related tools for SDG number 8. Professor Jose Caridi is an engineer. He has a Master's of Science in System Engineering from the University of Chile, from the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, where he is also an adjunct professor. He is currently working in the cabinet of the Chilean Minister of Science, Technology, Knowledge, and Innovation at the Future Team. And he will bring a perspective from the point of view of a national government, asking what are the questions that a government can address to help improve the use of space-related data, both from Earth and from space, including astronomy, to support economic growth. In addition, we'll hear from Genevieve Yaume. She is the sales manager at Greenkeeper Africa, an entrepreneurial company, where she leads the market development strategies of the company. Her responsibilities include collaborating with health, safety, and environment officers of various industrial companies across Africa, because her company sells a unique product, which we'll hear more about, that is useful for cleaning oil pollution, which is of important relevance today. I look forward so much to these examples, and we'll actually see a case where this local company, in a very unique context, is using satellite data to address how they can serve the needs, both for addressing the use of invasive plant, as well as serving industrial pollution management. I'm very excited to have these three speakers. And with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Bruno Sanchez Andrade Nuno, and he will speak without slides, so we'll just enjoy hearing his presentation and seeing the next discussion. And thank you so much, Bruno, for bringing your perspective and answering the question, what are the high-level ways that we have currently seen to use space data, especially Earth observation data and other space-related data, to address SDG number 8? Please go ahead.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you everyone for joining. I just want to start to recognize that these are very special times, and we are very thankful that you choose to join us to talk about these issues. What I will try to do in the next 5 to 8 minutes, it's not easy task, because one of my key messages is that when we talk about SDGs and satellites, typically those who know about SDGs do not know about satellites, and those who know about satellites do not know about SDGs. Well, except Daniel. Daniel really knows a lot about both. That's why she's hosting this session. So this is really one of the key takeaways that I want to take from my my experience. Quickly, I would summarize my experience as a scientist who is trying to have the best impact, real impact in the world. My background is in astrophysics, in very, very basic research, but then I ended up working in places like startups, like Mapbox or Satellogic, or big corporations like Microsoft now, or public institutions like the World Bank. And in all of these places, I've tried to do the same, which is how we can bring science and data as a tool to help move forward progress. And it's not easy at all. And this is something I hope to encourage those of you who are scientists to engage more in these issues. Hopefully you're here because you have hunger for this. But also those who are experts in development to then look at those people who know more about satellites or data in general, and try to leverage all the revolution that is happening, because truly we are living a revolution of data and the kind of insights we get. So what I'm going to try to do, as Danielle was doing also in her introduction, is that today we are talking about the SDG 8 of the 17 goals. This is one of them. Of 17 goals, there are also 169 targets. And one of the things I did a few years ago is then go to this long list of targets and then figuring out which ones are very related to satellites, that could be measured with satellites, totally or partially, which ones are proxies, because they don't measure something that is directly related, but could be a proxy for the kind of information we need, or those who are not related at all. Like, for example, financial policies, probably not really related to that, but agriculture is very related, something you can do with satellites. And what I found, and we could discuss about this if you want, is that roughly of the 168 targets to cover the 17 goals, 1/3 of the SDG targets are directly related or measure something that is totally or partially relevant for that goal. 1/3 of them is a proxy of the data, and 1/3 of them is not related. And that tells that 2/3 of these targets are very relevant in the sense that we can really help a lot, but that use can be hard to do. Obviously, we can think of images of satellites. The one I have behind me is an image taken from space of Gambia, and it's a beautiful image. We can use it to put in the map the roads or the agriculture things or whatever thing it is. But this particular image was also taken because there is this parasite in the rivers that affects the people and affects their brains, but it breeds on little snails that first feed on algae on the river. And this is also a little bit related with what Genevieve is going to talk about later. But this is an example of how, from an image, you can infer the amount of algae, which is what this snail feeds, which is what then can have impacts in people. So it's a way to really connect parasites in the brain of people to satellite images, which is not obvious at all, but I think hopefully opens the mind to the kind of things that we can do with satellites, which could be extremely impactful. I would also like to spend just a little bit, maybe a minute or so, to think about the targets. It's not that many. It's just 12 targets in this SDG 8, and I'm not gonna read them all because it's not interesting, but it is gonna underpin this discussion. So when we talk about the SDG 8, which is about sustained, inclusive, sustainable economic growth and employment, let's just keep in mind these 12 issues. One is this per capita economic growth. This is I'm just gonna tell the key target of these 12 targets. One is economic growth is very important, and there is even the point of 7% economic growth for the least developed countries. Today in the world, we are seeing 2% economic growth. So we are even before COVID. Another one is productivity through diversification, technological diversification and innovation. Let's think about diversification and technological innovations. We talk about these things. Let's think about policies to drive this employment. Let's think about resource efficiency. And this is very important because we really need to decouple economic growth and sustainability, environmental sustainability. We cannot continue to impact the environment as we want to grow. We want to grow, but we have to decouple that from the environment. Let's think also about, as Daniel also highlighted, that employment for all, men and women, people with disabilities, and equal work for equal value. Let's think about youth especially who are not employed or in education or in training. Let's think about what we do with this at-risk youth, especially in terms of either education or employment. Let's think about labor rights. Let's think about sustainable tourism, as also Daniel highlighted, that the value of culture in this type of employment. Let's think about financial services for all, especially women. It's just the largest minority that is hugely affected by this inequality. These are 10 targets of the SDG 8. There are 2 special targets, which is means of implementation, which is related to an aid for trade to facilitate these employments, and also there is also international labor organization who is trying to help in these issues. These are the 12 targets. We have agreed as a world we need to focus on this goal. I also want to highlight a few words, a few references. This is like homework for those of you who want to know more about these issues. One is the excellent resource of the World Development Report done every year by the World Bank. There are 3 that I want to highlight that I think are very relevant for this. Is the World Development Report in 2016, which is data dividends. And the key point of that report is that we live in a world that technology is giving not only a lot of value, but a lot of dividends, meaning that those who are using these digital assets get a lot of dividends, and those who are not then get further and further behind. And so this report highlights the value of not crossing the digital divide, but leveraging on the digital dividends. So one step removed. The other one is the one from 2019, which is the changing nature of work. How relevant in 2019, even before this COVID has pushed everyone to think about work, the world was already talking about the future of work. So they also focus on developing countries and the future of work. The punchline in this report is that it recognizes the value of this digital transformation, the value of these platforms that are happening in the world, like Uber, like Airbnb, like this gig economy, which is great because it enables almost anyone from almost anywhere in the world to participate in the gig economy. But at the same time, the type of employment is much more fragile. In the sense, it moves in, moves out, and there is less rights and less resilience when something happens, either because you cannot go to work or you have other issues or the economy suffers an external event, like, for example, COVID. So let's think about those, and let's think about, in terms of policies, how, and this is the World Bank saying this, it is very important to offer universal healthcare, offer universal safety nets, so that you don't depend on your employment to have basic employment, basic health. And also the value of education. There is literally less neurons in kids who are stunned because of poor nutrition. So there's literally neurons that are lost for the well-being of people if at a critical age, like it's when they're kids, they don't have help or support, minimal support. The last one is the one that is happening right now. The World Development Report for next year is about data for better lives. So these reports usually involve a lot of online consultations. So if you are keen to know more about that, to see the drafts, to comment on these drafts, just go to the World Bank and do that. And the last reference I wanted to highlight is the Brookings Institution have made a report called Realism About Reskilling. When we talk about jobs, we have to also realize, as I said before, a lot of people, not only in developing countries, also in the US and in Europe, more and more people are dependent on gig jobs, that they might lose them, they have 2 or 3 of them, and they really struggle to do that, especially if they come from a minority or they come from another country. So these are reports that I highlight because they also have policy recommendations and highlight topics. Happy to talk more about this. I'm just gonna go quickly to some examples to set also the stage, and I'll move on, Daniel, to the next speakers. But I wanted to highlight real examples that we can also drive not only the global context, but what we can do. So some of the things that satellites or aerial or drones can help in the discussion is that, for example, estimating poverty, estimating how much poverty there is in a place. There is a lot of studies using, for example, night lights that take images from satellites at night and then see how those lights change year to year. And they have seen, for example, in Eastern Europe, how the whole peri-urban regions of the cities have decreased in lights because there was more unemployment. So those people who live in the middle income around the big cities, they basically moved out because there was so much employment. We see the same in Africa and in Asia, where lights, just having lights in your house is a necessity for education or for employment. So it's a proxy to estimate that. There have been a lot of progress in machine learning to do these things, to estimate as a proxy. There's also a lot of work figuring out roads. Roads are very important for accessibility, to get out the crops from agriculture, to get in, and in terms of emergencies, to go to the hospital, to do your services. Are the roads paved or not paved? It's something you can answer from space. And you can answer anywhere in the world. If it works in the US, it's going to work fairly good anywhere in the world. Or you can transfer that learning, not that difficult. So we have the answer. We have the technology to answer any road in the world. Is it paved or not paved? Is it flooded or not flooded? Do you need more roads here or not? Those kind of answers we can answer from space. And I've been involved in project to do this in China and in Philippines. I'll go quickly because I think I'm already not that good in time, but I'm happy to answer more questions. There's a lot of projects also, and we'll hear about astronomy and satellites. There's the value of lowering the barrier of using satellite images. I hope that you understand this key message that I wanted to highlight, is that it's really hard to understand satellite images, pixel resolution, nadir angles, spectral bands. We have to make it more digestible, those of us who understand satellites, so that when someone asks, hey, I need to know if there's electricity in this village, you can say, hey, I know how to do it, but I will not refer you to the satellite image. I will refer you the process, to the insights. Let's go from pixels to insights. And we've done that a lot in the examples that I said before, also in Kosovo, talking about land rights and making updated maps to offer collateral titles of land for women to offer to get bank loans. There's also on the communications space, how, for example, companies like Inmarsat are offering communication to boats in the Philippines so that they can communicate with their families when they are at sea, and they can keep in touch, and at the same time we can know where the fishing boats are to prevent illegal fishing. I'm going to stop here. I have tons more examples if there is more questions, but I'm really looking forward to hearing from the other panelists.
Thank you so much, Bruno. It was wonderful to have you give us a stage setting, both, as you said, exploring our understanding of the SDGs. And SDG 8 does have this broad view, right, of asking how do we grow economic growth sustainably for the environment and the humans so people have good wages, safe places to work at all stages of life, youth, and people of different gender backgrounds, immigration backgrounds. Thank you for that. As a reminder to the participants, you can join the conversation by going to slido.com and using hashtag SDG8. And you'll see our poll asking about your own connection with the Sustainable Development Goal 8 targets. We asked about 3 to highlight which are the most important in your work. So we'll continue now, and I'll be hosting the slides here for our next speaker. And so it's an honor to introduce Professor Jose Garidi from the Ministry of Science and Technology, Knowledge and Innovation in Chile, which is a relatively new ministry. Looking forward to hearing your comments. And just let me know when to advance the slides. Please go ahead, Jose.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you everyone for joining and for having me here. So I will have my next slide, please. I will try to share some thoughts on this time about how we can use astronomy, not only space, observation from space, but also observation of space, and try to highlight how we can make easier the use of satellite images, as Bruno said, but in a different way, not only from insights, but also from what means working with data. So I will start from something previous to data, from that is some research that I conducted in the last several years about natural laboratories that are something that we have been using here in Chile to highlight some specific sites with some that have unique geographic characteristics. And the idea is how we can use these sites to engage into competitive science, and also how we can extract economic value and social value from these unique places. So something that we've been researching is how we can use something as unique as astronomy and the desert that we have here in Chile, that we are a small developing country, to engage into economic growth, and also to get into this new fourth revolution or technological revolution. So I will talk something about that, and how this can converge with space data. So please, next. So something we have here in Chile, just as a context, is that our Atacama Desert in the north of Chile is very unique, and we will host in the following 10 years more than around 2/3 of the world's observation capacity, depending on how we measure it. For example, if we think on the ETENDU, that's like the size of the mirrors in the astronomical observatories, multiply by the field vision. You can have like 65% of the world's ETENDU here in Chile. We have like 70% of the largest telescopes here in Chile, and we can also think on radio astronomy that we have the largest array here in Chile, and that's because we have some very unique characteristic at the north. We have the driest desert. We have a very high mountains that are very close to the sea, and that's something that it's only comparable to some sites in Africa that will be hosting some telescope also, and some sites in the Antarctica that has very hard logistic characteristic of space observation. So here in Chile, we have a long story with astronomy that comes from our culture and also from science. So if you have my next slide, please. So astronomy in Chile starts in 1849, so it's more than 100. It's more than 100 years right now, with an initiative from the US that came to install one of the first telescopes that we have, because what you can observe in the southern hemisphere is different from what you can observe in the northern hemisphere. And we have a long story of astronomy, but it started exploding in the 1960s when some scientists discovered that Chile has this unique characteristic that could host large telescope. In that time, there were 4-meter telescope. Right now, we are having a larger telescope than that. And from the 1960s, Chile also identified that this was an opportunity first for improving science and fostering science here in Chile, but later on, we also identified from the government that this could be leveraged for economic growth and from some other things, such as science awareness, such as modernizing our institutions, our science-related institutions, and some more things that we have been working since the 1960s up until today. And I show only 2 graphs here to show how, for example, astronomers has grown in Chile, and from the year 2000 up until today, we grow from like 100 astronomers to almost 1,000. I think that now we have more than 1,000 astronomers here in Chile, and we are a very small country. And also how telescope has grown in the last few decades. So we have like a linear growth from the 1960s up until today, and we will be hosting some of the largest telescopes in the world. Now we have ALMA, that, as I said, is the largest array of radio telescope, but we will also be having some of very unique telescope like the Vera Rubin Observatory, that's also known as the LSST, that will map the whole sky every 3 days and producing tons of data. So around 2010, here in Chile, we start thinking, okay, we have a lot of astronomy, we have a lot of astronomers, what else can we do with that? And we started thinking about these natural laboratories and how we could see something that was common to astronomy to some other industry or to some other science. And we started thinking how to take advantage of astronomy. And that's when we started researching about this. So next, please. So something we realized is that all the data from astronomy was very common to other fields. And one of those fields in this case is the Earth observation. And how you observe the sky has a lot of commonalities on how you observe the Earth. And that's something that has been discussed in the last couple of years. In fact, there's an initiative that's called NIRIAD that was talking about and developed this image, how space astronomy and geoscience could converge not only on the science itself, but also in how they interact among scientists, and the different attitudes scientists that are involved in space observation are also involved in Earth observation. And what we discussed in this workshop that was reported to the NSF is that there is need for some support structure to enable this convergence, but at the same time, the vehicle for this convergence between space observation and Earth observations was data science. And the idea is that both disciplines are producing tons of data, and that data has a lot of things in common, independent of what they are observing. Next. And this is a little image. It's also an animation, but as an image it serves, that shows how astronomical data has been growing. And if you see one of the small circles that is the LSST that will produce 10 petabytes of data per year. And there is a larger circle that's not visible right now, but it's the SKA that will start observing in South Africa and Australia in the next 10 to 15 years, that will produce more data that all of these telescopes and films together. So astronomy right now is one of the fields that produce most data in the world. So it was a huge opportunity, not because of all the fundamental question that we can answer looking to the sky, but also because of the amounts of data that it's producing. So next. And we also identify that astronomy, as such as some other domains, we could classify them as what we call as global value data set, because now all the things that we observe here in Chile serve not only Chilean scientists, but the world's scientists to discover different planets, where we could go in the future, and to analyze and to produce some of the most advanced techniques in data science to answer these fundamental questions that astronomy usually have. And that could be transferred to other domains, and that was what we were interested into, not only into the advancements of science, but also into the advancement of economy, and how we could create a new economy here in Chile that right now is heavily based in natural resources. So next. And the idea we came with, and this is a work for the last 5 years, more or less, or 10 years, is first that astronomy was 5 to 10 years ahead in data science compared to almost every other industry here in the region, at least Latin America, and mostly in the world. And also that these data-centric activities in space and Earth observation, not only astronomy, were transferable, and they had like 4 database activities that were common to any industry. And those are that any data scientist could do these 4 activities in any data set they had. And those are the acquisition and generation of data, how you can have these sensors and acquire good quality data, how you analyze that data, how you access and you govern that data, and how you explore and you visualize that data. And those 4 related activities are common not only to Earth observation and space observation, but also like for smart cities analysis, also in our case for mining industry, if you want to do some data science on mining or on agriculture, that is also very, very important here in Chile. So any abilities that you develop on these activities in astronomy or in space Earth observation, you could transfer them to any other industry, and probably you will have more abilities than the ones that were actually being used in this other industry. So with proper institutions, and that's the kind of the challenge, you could transfer knowledge, human capital to foster economic growth and create new jobs, and like to make the country more independent from the natural resources, creating also new industries. So briefly, the idea that we came with is to create a public and private public organization. It's an NGO that's called the Data Observatory that will work with astronomical data, and will use this astronomical data to transfer these abilities to other industries and to generate economic growth. The idea is to have a neutral broker that makes data available and makes data-based tools available for other domains, and also that could help training people into data-centric activities that are acquisition, analysis, and so on, the ones that I showed before. And we made an open call, and the Ministry of Chile offered $5 million, and it made an open call for private organizations to join. And the other 2 founders were Amazon Web Services and Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez here in Chile. And jointly, they created this NGO, and when it's finally launched, it will also make an open call for any organization or person who wants to join and to interact in this kind of network that will be centered on the Data Observatory to work with data. First from astronomy, but the idea was to transfer all the experience from astronomy to other domains. And the idea is to have like this dispersed data, both open data and restricted data, to make it interoperable, to prepare that data, and to make it available in a common data lake that could serve everyone and could foster economy. So next. Even though it's not fully operating now, the Data Observatory has been doing a couple of things, and I want to show 3 examples before the end of my presentation, and I think I'm a little past on time. First, the idea was to work on astronomy, and the idea of astronomy is that right now we have like this virtual observatory that makes at least astronomical data interoperable, but the idea is to have astronomers works in the cloud. Up until now, most astronomers work on premises. They are slowly transferring to the cloud, but something that doesn't really happen in all the world. And an example was the picture of the black hole that came a couple of months ago. And to make that picture, they had to ship tons of hard drives to the US so they could make that picture. The idea is that picture could have been made without shipping those hard drives, and it could be worked in the cloud. So one of the first idea is for the Data Observatory to advance the use of data in astronomy, and it the data observatory started working with ALMA data, and it will also include some other observatories. And Chile has a unique position to talk with different organizations and to different observatories and to have this transformation. And that's the first domain. A second domain that emerged, and it was because of the pandemic, is working with COVID. And we have in our government a lot of issues sharing and having open data and sharing data. There's issues about quality, issues about transference between different ministries, and there are no interoperable data sets, and it's pretty hard to have a common database for tracking the pandemic. So the Data Observatory has been helping the government from March to up until today to create this database about COVID in coordination with a lot of universities and different research centers. And now we have APIs and data sets that are updated every day, more than 50 data sets right now that are being used by more than 600,000 people. So it's a lot of people that are using our database for COVID, and all the heavyweight work on making that data usable has been done by the Data Observatory, and most of the experts that work at the Data Observatory come from astronomy. So it's a direct transfer of knowledge from astronomy and working with astronomy to now the pandemic. And next. And the third example, and here I will end my presentation so we can discuss more later, is is that a second domain that was thought of the Data Observatory, now it will be the third because of COVID, is to work with climate change. And here there is the direct convergence of Earth observation and space observation. And Chile is a natural laboratory, not only for astronomy, because we have a lot of astronomical observation, but also for climate change, because we are a small country, but a very long country. And since we are a very long country, we can have a lot of different weathers in the same place and a lot of different geographies in the same country. And also we are the door to the Antarctica. So we have some unique characteristics because of our long coastline. We have a unique characteristic in our Antarctic and subantarctic region that could serve to be like sensors for the world to analyze climate change. And the idea is to connect sensors all along the territory of Chile, and that's first challenge and infrastructure, and also to have all this data in a common repository, and that could serve not only scientists, but also industries and also people in general, to the civic society. And the idea is that the Data Observatory is at the center of this climate change observatory that we are designing right now. And for example, fishermen at the south of Chile could use this data that will converge sensors from the sea, Earth observation, and some other data that we could collect to see when they can go to the sea and have much better benefits, and when not to go to the sea, and so on. So it's to make all the data that is right now being collected by scientists to identify the gaps and to have this common climate change observatory that could serve Chile to foster entrepreneurship, to foster innovation, but also to serve the world for tracking climate change. And next. So just to sum up the idea, and I hope we can have a great discussion in the following minutes. The idea is that natural laboratories can enable emerging countries such as Chile, that we are a very small country, to pursue SDGs in an innovative way. Like the idea is we can have job creation and economic growth using our astronomical data, for example, or our unique characteristics, our desert, our sea, and to foster economic growth through that. The idea is to have good institutions, and that's the challenge here. It's to design a good institutional environment to create a national innovation system that can make use of these natural laboratories. And the specific case that I have shown is that we have developed this data observatory that can foster research and economic growth, and it directly takes advantage of these two natural laboratories that enables us to observe climate change and to observe the sky. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward for the questions.
Thank you so much, Jose. It's really interesting to think about your discussion because you're highlighting the role of a national government agency to make concrete decisions and plans over many years to establish first that your country is benefiting greatly from the naturally available resource of the natural laboratory, as well as designing further approaches, as you say, to make smart institutions to support the role of drawing knowledge from astronomy into other sectors. And I can just highlight, I really appreciated, I used the paper that you gave the example of that summarizes some of the concrete policies Chile has put in place to take advantage of the national laboratory. I use that in my teaching to highlight that doctoral, to highlight the example of how we can see research results showing the role of governments to help improve the benefits of this kind of national laboratory for the SDGs. So thank you so much for that example. It's a pleasure now to bring our next speaker, and we will hear from Genevieve Yanmei. And again, as a reminder, please go back to Slido if you have not done so, and you can answer our poll question highlighting which of the 3 SDG 8 targets you find most relevant to your work. And with that, it's a pleasure to pass it over to Genevieve. She is the sales manager at Greenkeeper Africa, and I can say it's a pleasure for Space Enabled to collaborate with your team. I look forward to you sharing a bit more about that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Danielle. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Thank you for joining us. And just before I go forward, I've been having a bit of problem with my internet connection. So in case I'm cut off, please bear with me. But I think things are settling down now. So if I could have the first slide, please. All right. So again, a bit of edit on that slide. It should be, how is Greenkeeper Africa, with the help of a Space Enabled Research Group, contributing to SDG 8 using satellite data? All right. So the next slide, please, Daniel. Thank you. So this is an aerial image of the Lake Nukwe, a water body which is located in the southern region of Benin. And on this image, you can see the water body, you can see the roof of the houses built on stilts. And the local community in this region has been going through some difficulties because of the invasion of water hyacinth. And we'll see that in the next slide. All right, the next slide is coming up. So as I was mentioning, water hyacinth is an issue that we've been having in terms of invasion in West Africa and other countries as well. There you go. So there's a short video on this slide that shows how boat transportation is difficult because during certain period of the year, there's huge, this thick vegetation hampers transportation, and be it fishing, economic activities, etc. The local communities are having challenges with that, and that is what Greenkeeper Africa is working on, and we'll see more about that on the next slide. Next slide, please. All right, thank you. So to give a bit of background on Greenkeeper Africa, Greenkeeper Africa is a company created in 2014. And one of the goals of the company is to contribute to economic opportunity and social welfare using business-driven and research-based solutions to tackle environmental problems. And on the next slide, I will show you what our flagship product, our flagship solution is about. Thank you. It is an absorbent fiber that is made from water hyacinth, a natural fiber made from water hyacinth. And this product, as you can see, is used to absorb oil, mostly from oil spill in the industries. So our company, our product is sold mostly to industrial companies throughout Africa. Now, how did the partnership between State Enabled Research Group and Greenkeeper Africa started? It was in 2017 at the Global Entrepreneurship Summit, where Professor Wood met with Fola Muftau, who is the managing director of Greenkeeper Africa, and he invited her to come visit Greenkeeper Africa in Benin and to learn more about our work. which she did in 2018. And this visit led to a collaboration that started in 2018, which is to develop an observatory of invasive species. And with this, I think there is a slide before this one, unless I'm mistaken, there should be another slide before this one. There you go. So after this one comes the other slide, right? Okay, so. So yes, so after this one, please, the next slide. There you go, this one, thank you. So on this slide, we can see some of the tools that we've been using with the help of space-enabled to improve on our work. So as I mentioned earlier, Greenkeeper Africa is an enterprise, right? So we use this water hyacinth as a raw material to develop an absorbent. Now, since this is an invasive plant that lives in an environment and it's, how should I say, it's a seasonal plant, so it doesn't grow throughout the year. With the help of Space Enabled, we've been able to, using satellite Earth observation tools, we've been able to track the plant throughout the years and see how it grows and how it flows from rivers to lakes. And we've been able to use drones to compare the data that we've been getting from the satellite imagery to what is happening in the field when you have an aerial vision of what it looks like compared to the satellite data. And the third tool that we've been using is to measure the quality of the water using sensors to track the water temperature, to track the salinity of the water, as well as the level of oxygen in the water, because those factors influence the proliferation or not of the water hyacinth. Next slide, please. Thank you. So there is another slide before this one, the map that is showed earlier with the green. Oh, okay. I don't know how that happened, but it should be later. Sorry about that. So anyway, so this map shows an example of some of the tools that we've been able to get with the help of Space Enabled. On this map, you see the green area is where the water hyacinth was present in November 2018. And this is very useful for us because since we work with the local communities in the region where water hyacinth is a problem, we work with them to go harvest the water hyacinth for us, and we buy it from them. Now, having this type of map can tell us at a specific time of the year. We could tell them, say, next November, you should go to the northern part of the lake because that is where you're more likely to have water hyacinth. And then we can focus our efforts in specific regions and organize the harvesting teams in a more efficient way. So if we could come back to the map, the observatory map, please. Thank you. Sorry about the going back and forth on the slides. Thank you. So this tool is an example of one of one of the things that we're doing with Space Enable, which is to have an online observatory tool, so that throughout the years, when you track the salinity, the temperature, and the water flow or any other factors in the water, you'll be able to make decisions in terms of, as I said earlier, you could say, this is where we want to harvest this year because that is where we're likely to have more water hyacinth. And this online map would also help us organize our work with the local communities, because depending on the village where we are, depending on the villages where we're working, we could tell the specific village, so we have more water hyacinth in your area, so you guys should be the one going to do the harvesting, right? So those are specific usage of data obtained from satellite that we'll be able to implement and use in our daily work. So I would also like to talk a bit about our work with the local communities. So next slide, please. Thank you. we, as I mentioned earlier, we work with the local communities to go harvest the water hyacinth. We have a network of over 1,000 collectors of water hyacinth, and about 70% of them are women. And what we do with the local communities is we train them on how to go harvest the water hyacinth, how to harvest it in a more efficient way. But since this activity is a seasonal activity, we are also working with the local community so that they will have other revenue generating activities during the off season where harvesting water hyacinth is not an option. So what we're doing with them is, for example, to help them to have to know how to do composting using water hyacinth or other plants in the region, so that they could go sell this compost to companies or agricultural to farms, for example. That is just one example of what we're doing with the local communities. But we're also working with entrepreneurs in the region. So on the next slide, we'll talk more a bit about that. So we've just trained 100 entrepreneurs in the regions where we harvest water hyacinth, but not that they are necessarily linked to our harvesting business. It's just that we wanted to make sure that people in the region are also benefiting from our work. So we've just trained 100 entrepreneurs, and among the 100 entrepreneurs, we have 70% women entrepreneurs. And what we are going to do in the next phase is we've just selected 20 entrepreneurs from that pool that are going to receive further mentoring and financial support. And I would also like to mention that the training was about how to build a business plan. How do you make sure that you take into account all the tools that you need for your business to be successful? So they're entrepreneurs, but they're also getting training on how to improve their business. And our goal is that Greenkeeper Africa being present in this environment, we want to make sure that people are benefiting from our work. And we've been using data from space. Basically, we are also going to be using, tracking our work with all these local community people on the map, so that we know exactly where we are, how many people we are working with, and what have they been doing, what type of activities they have other than harvesting our raw material. So the final slide, please. Thank you. To summarize my presentation, I would say that Greenkeeper Africa's work very much aligns with many of the SDG goals, and mainly the focus of today's discussion, which is the SDG number 8. And I'm more than happy to share more about our work during the question times. But thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Genevieve. I really appreciate you going very locally and really addressing what's happening on the ground for particular women who live in Benin and how they're experiencing the benefits of using a tool informed by satellite data. But I also just wanted to give credit, because so much of the innovation of Greenkeeper Africa was already in place even before I met you all. But it's exciting to see how we can mix your innovative idea of converting an invasive plant into a commercial product that also is helpful for even things like the current oil spill in Mauritius, and also addressing that while trying to create opportunities for decent work and economic growth in your community. Just as a reminder to everyone, you can join the conversation at Slido, and actually it's a good opportunity for us to see what the results have been on our poll. So I'm going to briefly go into that side and to show us what we can see from our poll discussion, and the question of which SDG of the number 3 targets that I highlighted, SDG 8.3 target, SDG 8.5 target, and SDG 8.9. We had 31 responses. Thank you so much. You can still put in your notes if you'd like to, but you can go to slido.com, put in hashtag SDG8, and we wanted to find out which of these 3 areas seemed most relevant to the people who are listening today and watching on today's virtual presentation. So far we seem to have a pretty strong highlight for SDG 8.3 target, promoting development-oriented policies that support productive activities, decent job creation, entrepreneurship, creativity, and innovation. And I saw that was linked closely to both the presentations by Genevieve as well as also to Jose. Both of them talked about either at the government level creating policies, or actually being one of the organizations that's doing entrepreneurship but it's great to see that Greenkeeper Africa is in turn enabling additional entrepreneurs. And so we also had some response for all of the above. So I think many people are working more broadly across the different areas, and some are also working on the SDG 8.5, achieving full and productive employment and decent work for all women and men. And of course, I note the contributions of Greenkeeper Africa, highlighting women in particular. So let's continue. We'll have a few brief discussions with our panelists before we go back and take on questions from the audience. So also as a reminder to the audience, if you go to slido.com, in addition to seeing this poll, you can choose the Q&A section and enter a question for our panelists for discussion in a few moments. So please consider that as well. But Genevieve, I have a question for you as we get started. Reflecting on SDG 8.5, which you see here, achieving full and productive employment and decent work for all women and men, including young people and people with disabilities. I want to just think about the approaches that Greenkeeper Africa is using. First, it was innovative, over the last few years that you've created these paid work opportunities in your community. You've also created internships. I know that you've had student interns who are recent graduates from undergraduate studies in their first year. You've created opportunities for members of the Lake Nokwe community to have this training in entrepreneurship. So first I want to ask, what has been really effective in engaging with these local communities? They're different audiences, right? Whether you're talking about the collectors who might need seasonal pay versus the students, but how have you as a company engaged effectively with these different organizations? What's worked well for you?
Thank you. Thank you for this question. So talking about how we've been able to involve all this different group of people, I think it's because of the core values at Greenkeeper Africa. We've been upfront at the beginning, since the beginning, that our work is not only economic focus, but is also focusing on the environmental and the social aspect of our work. So with the local communities, for example, before we start working with a specific village to harvest our plant, we go into the village and we explain the project to them. We explain what we are doing while we are removing this plant from the environment and what that can bring to the local communities. And so we make sure that they understand our goal and they're willing to participate. And from there, they just immediately buy into to this idea, and they're more than happy. And they even have a specific name for this water hyacinth environment, where now that we're removing it, it's a benefit for them. They very much appreciate that idea, even if we were not willing to pay them, but now we wanted to make sure that it's a paid job, right? So they're more than willing to help. Now, talking about the internship program, one of Greenkeeper Africa's goals, or what is one of the things that are important for us, is that making sure that the next generation, the upcoming generation, is very much involved in what is happening in their community. So we're always willing to share, to bring in students that want to learn about Greenkeeper Africa, that are working on specific fields that could be useful for us, say research and development, how to come up with eco-materials using water hyacinth as a raw material. We're talking about satellite data, how do you use technology in the work that we're doing? So I would say it's a lot of it's small things put together that make our program very attractive to all this group of people, and we just make sure to be genuine with them and to share what we're doing, because I think sharing the information, putting out there the information, is very important for people to buy into whatever you're doing. So we just communicate a lot.
Thank you, Genevieve. And I just reflect, as you talk about communication, we're speaking today in English, but I know mainly you use French within your daily work, but also those who do the harvesting have even additional local languages, right? So communication is really done multilingually. Talk about that briefly.
Can you hear me now? I think I lost you for a few seconds there.
Yes, I was just highlighting the fact that you mentioned the importance of communication, and actually many people in the team speak several languages, because you're presenting in English, but normally you use French, but also in speaking to the local harvesters, some of your team members also speak their local languages. So it's really great that you're able to work that way. Exactly. Thank you. Thank you. Let's turn to Bruno. Thank you so much for your patience. And I have a question for you directly. You gave some great opening comments about discussion and really gave us a strong foundation, noting that satellite Earth observation can be used to help estimate poverty. It can also be supportive of decision-making in things like planning, transportation, and it can support creative businesses. And it can also help us evaluate the impact of using satellite data or of any initiative to support entrepreneurship. Which of these areas of, I guess, for sort of scoping the challenge, supporting initiatives like what you see Greek for Africa, or doing evaluation, which is most mature? And where do you think we're seeing new technology trends or business trends to increase the maturity of all three applications? Take about 2 minutes.
Yeah, so I think there are a few trends that are worth highlighting. I would also try to broaden the scope, not only satellites, but images in general. I think there has been also a revolution with drones. Genevieve was also mentioning it, but also aerial photography from planes. And in all of these areas, there have been a revolution in each of these. But then, like, for example, satellites are now cheaper to launch, cheaper to operate, and the pixels, the images are much cheaper, and they will become cheaper. But then there is all this maturity of the services, where it used to be that you just give the raster, the data to the user, and then they do their own thing. But now the ecosystem is maturing in a sense that now consumers want the insights directly. So they want to know, hey, tell me what's the area of, for example, of these plants in the lake. They don't want to know the image themselves. They just want to know the coverage of the lake. So I think there's been a consolidation of the market in that vertical, saying, hey, I don't want the pixels, I want the insights. That's something that I'm glad to see. And also of highlight the diversification of players. So now it used to be only big corporations or big companies, because satellites needs a lot of upfront capital. But now we see companies like, for example, Satellogic coming from Argentina, which is fantastic. And analytics companies coming from Asia, coming from Africa, coming from other places that make things much more interesting.
Thank you so much, Bruno. And turning back to Jose, I want to focus again on SDG 8.3 and the idea that you have seen some practical ways that this data observatory can play a role to try to make a difference in the ecosystem of businesses, of public-private partnerships in Chile. Can you give some additional examples, building on what you shared earlier? How are you seeing private entities reacting to the data observatory, and how do they want to get involved with this transfer of data science tools to other sectors?
Yeah, thank you for the question. The data observatory is in early stages, so probably it's more a vision that what will happen more than what's actually happening. But some of the interactions that we are having, the most specific ones are those related with COVID, but those are not especially related to economic growth. But for example, when we were designing the data observatory, we have a couple proof of concepts, and one of them was working with the ALMA observatory, with the operations data of their antennas. A team at Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez, along with people from the data observatory, were designing how use that data for predictive maintenance. So transferring the idea from the antennas from ALMA to other industry. And in that moment, for example, we talked with people that work at the solar industry and how they could use data from operating antennas at ALMA could be used also for maintaining these solar panels, and there were very specific solar panels that moved during the day to absorb more energy, and also they have very specific characteristics because our desert was so dry that sometimes they burned because there was so much energy. And that's one specific example that fostering industry. That's something that was only a proof of concept, that it's the potential kind of initiative that could happen. And another idea is that one of the lines of work of the data observatory is specifically on human capital and fostering talent. So the idea is to have the data observatory developing tools and developing instances for hands-on experience on data science. And the idea is to engage with different firms. And while we were designing and implementing the data observatory, there were initial conversations with different firms from the retail industry, for example, or some others that were interested in having their data scientists working with different kind of data sets that demanded them to improve their skills. And the data observatory could be that place that enables those data scientists working usually at the retail or some other industry to work with astronomical data, specially curated for them to develop some specific skills. And that's a specific line of work that the idea is not to compete with universities or educational institutions, but to complement their experience with hands-on experience and specially curated data set from Earth observation and astronomy, that are the first two domains for them to work with those data sets.
Thank you so much, Jose. And staying with you for a moment, I'm looking again at SDG 8.9 target, which talks about the idea of sustainable tourism. And I'll ask both you and Genevieve to respond, because tourism does play a role. It was a smaller number of the votes here, but I know in Chile, for example, there are examples of things like astrotourism, the idea of fostering visitors who come to experience the natural laboratory, while also acknowledging that some of the land where the Atacama Desert is located and you have the telescopes is also a traditional homeland of various indigenous communities who may be affected by tourism in both negative and positive ways. What are some of the complex ways you think about astrotourism fitting into SDG 8 goals of creating economic growth?
Well, that's a very interesting question, since we have a very beautiful story here in Chile with astronomy. And even before the 1849 that I said, the indigenous people here in Chile looked to the sky and asked them fundamental questions. So we have some stories, for example, that the Atacameñan culture here in Chile used pools of water to observe the sky. They watch at the reflection, and they use sticks in the water to plant, for example, for crops or some other things when they were there in the desert. So that's something that very into our DNA as a nation. And also we have, for example, data from a survey in 2016 where Chileans were asked what's most significant for them, for Chile, what they think that Chile is unique for. And the fourth option was astronomy and the Chilean skies. So here in Chile, we are very conscious of our sky, and the way that astronomy has developed in the north has been very conscious from indigenous people. And that's itself is very complex. In Hawaii, they are having a lot of troubles with their telescope with indigenous people in Hawaii. But here, for example, ALMA Observatory, when was installed here in Chile, it work along with indigenous people, so they won't have trouble in the future, and at the same time for ALMA to be part of the culture at the north. So that's connected on how the astrotourism has developed up until today. And most people who go to the north to experience astrotourism is also hoping to experience those ancestral roots that are connected with watching the skies. So the developing of the astrotourism industry is very connected to the local culture and to indigenous people. So they have come along very well. Obviously, there are a lot of challenges, because also the north of Chile is unique for the mining industry. So a lot of institutional effort has to be done to protect all these places so they don't get destroyed, not only for tourism, but also because of their scientific value. And we have, for example, a lot of light pollution protection laws that, for example, demands to assess what will be the impact on the skies when you are planning a mining enterprise or any enterprise that could affect these places. So there's an institutional effort on protecting these unique places, and also there is a very hard organizational effort when the telescope and astrotourism firms are installed to work with indigenous people and to respect the culture that is on the north of Chile. But thankfully, it is something that is very deeply in our DNA. So it's something that has come up until today very naturally.
Thank you, Jose. Actually, we could have a whole discussion just on this topic of the historical culture of the indigenous community doing astronomy for many generations, and the question of what it means to visit their location and to do astronomy now. And I thank you so much for summarizing those key points about the interplay between indigenous lands, the modern astronomy, as well as the mining needs and concerns in the country. Thank you for that discussion. I'll just turn briefly to Genevieve. Thinking about the question of tourism, I know it's one of the area you showed when we looked at the aerial view of this area. It's a beautiful location where people are living with homes directly over the water. And I think tourism is one of the possible directions for possible development. Will you speak about how tourism fits into the discussions you have at Green Key for Africa and the local community?
Thank you, Danielle. Yes, thank you for this question. And absolutely, that image, that first image on my slide, the place is called Ganvier. It's a lakeside village where people live directly on the water. And one of the problems they've been having is access to the villages, because when tourists come, they're not always able to access the villages because of the invasion of water hyacinth. So one of the main advantage I see in our collaboration with the local communities is for them to be able to harvest the plants out of this area to clear the water bodies, the waterways, so that tourists can come in and visit their beautiful village. And the other, what we're also doing with the local communities, if I take, for example, this group of entrepreneurs that we're working with, we're encouraging those who feel like working in that field to go into should I say, artisanal local products. So we're using, for example, excuse me, water hyacinth to weave baskets, using the fibers to weave baskets. And we are helping them in the training. So we're putting them in contact with the mentors that can train them to design beautiful products that could be sold to tourists and, to show the riches of all these local products. So linking the tourists to the villagers and clearing the waterways so that they come in to visit these beautiful places. Those are some of the ways that we are, I would say, contributing to promoting tourism with Green Deep Africa.
Thank you so much. So I appreciate Genevieve and Jose reflecting on the topic of tourism. It's a complex topic because, of course, the local needs need to be the first topic, and then we consider the needs of tourists who might be visiting and how they can respect local community and culture. But finding creative ways for positive interaction between the tourists and the local communities is something so important that both of you are thinking about, so thank you. I'm going to briefly switch over now. We'll be able to see the Q&A that's come in. So thank you so much for the organizations and the groups that have joined. It's lovely to have your questions coming through. And I think we'll be able to quickly do some of these technical discussions. We see a few that are highlighted here, talking about other dashboards or platforms today that use satellite data for measuring SDG indicators. I want to turn to Bruno and ask for your comments on this first question.
Good question. I would say the easiest place to go would be go to NASA, the American NASA, nasa.gov, and go to the SDG page. They have I think it's literally sdg.nasa. Let me just check. It's a little bit, so just need to Google NASA SDGs and you will find a page that has a list of all the goals and then the kind of things satellites can help do with Earth observation. Same thing with the ESA, the European Space Agency. You can go to, in this case, it's sdg.esa.int, and you have a set of blog posts and articles about it. A dashboard per se of what you can do with that, I do not think it exists, and it would be amazing to see that happen. And part of the reason it doesn't exist is because I think the focus would be on the applications. The dashboard is great, maybe it's academic value, but what I want to see is more the kind of you see on the ESA. Is I want to see a lot of people, like for example, Genevieve working using satellite data, and she's working on those targets, and there is a satellite use. Maybe a collection of that, focusing on these applications would be, I find it interesting. But that would be two places I would go if you wanted to see dashboards of satellite use for SDGs.
Thank you so much, Bruno. And I can just highlight that the European Space Agency is also very active in talking about applications, not just for dashboards, but the broader benefits of using satellite data for the SDGs. So I do encourage you to look up, in addition to NASA and SDGs, also look up ESA, as well as the Group on Earth Observation, which is an intergovernmental organization that includes many different governments contributing to this broader topic. I think that will be relevant. And I think we have some folks online today representing GEO, which is excellent. I want to get some of the technical questions. We have an example asking about the role of the combination of satellite data, data from aerial vehicles, and data from in-situ sensors. So Genevieve pointed out that in the case of our project with Greenkeeper Africa and Space Enabled, we're trying to combine all three types of data. And I wanted to ask Bruno, can you comment in your experience you've worked in organizations that produce satellite data, and you've also seen applications that combine data from different sources. What have you seen as some of the distinction between the platforms? What's the strength of a satellite data versus a drone data set, for example?
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Another great question. I would say that it should not matter if it comes from satellite drones or applications. It matters what application it is. the solution you build, if possible, should be agnostic to use either of. Of course, drone data, because it flies so close to the ground, has much more spatial resolution, which is fantastic for example, detecting things that are small, or can have a thermal camera, and in that sense is much better. But it's harder to make something at a wide scale or in places you cannot go because there is some instability situation or because it's not feasible to go there. Satellites go around the world. The only thing that limits satellites is clouds. And if you go radar, you go through clouds. So for that case, satellites are much better. Planes are in this weird middle spot that it's kind of expensive to send a plane to do the surveys, but still the US, for example, uses that for agriculture. Like NAPE is this data sets of data at 1 meter resolution. But I just wanted to reflect that it quickly becomes a complex conversation, and don't feel afraid or discouraged because of complex names or things. Just focus on the application, and if you cannot answer that, talk with someone who knows about these technological things. Again, there's so much potential to use this kind of data, and the language or the technicalities should not be the limiting factor.
Thank you, Bruno. And I have a question I would consider both Genevieve and Jose to answer. Basically, they're asking about the ethical concerns regarding either privacy or security or the needs of local communities. What ethical concerns has your team been considering for Jose at the national scale, for Genevieve at the local scale, as you consider using Earth observation or scientific tools for SDG 8? What are some of the ethical questions that you're facing? I'll start with Genevieve.
Thank you. That is a good question. I would say that we most of the data that we're collecting using satellite information is very should I say, for example, satellite data is very high level, right? So we haven't had any problem with are we infringing on anyone's right, or there is privacy or any other type of questions like that. And in terms of using the drone, for example, to have access to data, it's always tracking where is the water hyacinth and what are we going to do with, where should we go harvest the plant. And in that sense, we haven't had any ethical question. Now, talking about the local communities themselves, we've always been able to explain to them, this is what we are doing. And when you go into the village, it's always a very, it's not a top-down kind of conversation, it's a partnership between the local communities. So clearly they feel that it's a partnership. It's not that we come in with money and we say, you do this and I pay you. So it's a partnership. So, and we've been able to tell them for the training, for example, that we're training them to work with us, but they could also use this knowledge for something else other than working with Greenkeeper Africa. I don't know if I answered the question, but we haven't really had any ethical complaints or questions raised for now. So that's what I can say about this question.
Thank you. And I think you've also addressed another question that came up, basically asking how you're involving communities in decision-making. I think you just addressed that, saying that there's a lot of meetings, actually, that I know some of the team members on your team spend hours talking to communities and listening to their ideas, including figuring out how to best set the prices, for example. So I appreciate your example for that. Let's go back to Jose and ask, at the national scale and the government of Chile, what ethical questions do you have as you want to bring the benefits of data science from astronomy and from Earth observation into other fields?
Well, I have two ideas to share here. The idea, for example, on the data observatory is that astronomical data and the climate change data that we are using has not privacy issues. At least until we spot an alien looking through the window, we won't have any privacy issues with astronomical data. And the idea to start with astronomy is that it's data that is very well curated and at the same time has this kind of issues, so it's easy to work with, and that's the idea. And the data observatory will focus on those kind of data sets. But at the same time, talking about the privacy issue, that's a challenge right now here in Chile. We have a privacy law that's on the Congress and for a long time, because our privacy law right now is very old. And the area that it's influencing the most this discussion is our AI policy that's something that I'm leading also, so I can talk a little bit about that. And what we are trying to do there is to have a very, very broad and open participation process. In the idea is that constructing this kind of governance should be from a multi-stakeholders perspective. So we are, in fact, just ending our participation process next week, but we started it on March. And we are involving very different communities into thinking how we will have policy regarding privacy and regarding other issues, in this case, for example, explainability of algorithms and some other things. And the idea is to have this broad discussion before even before we have a draft of the policy. So we are, from the Ministry of Science, trying to push this kind of policy creation that comes from discussing and co-creating policies with all the different actors that want to participate. And we have had a very heterogeneous participation. For example, we have self-convocated roundtables that goes from firms like Microsoft, for example, that said what they thought about how the policy should be. But at the same time, for example, we had a couple of roundtables that teenagers and children gathered together, discussed about AI and technology in general, and how they envision the society in the next years, and how that could be considered by the government to create this national policy. And now we are also starting to think about a new space policy, because we are right now working on a new satellite, and also having a new space policy for the next 5 years. The idea is to use the same approach to engage with a multi-stakeholder process, an open and broad process, even before we have drafts. So the idea is to have this conversation from the beginning on constructing this kind of governance.
Thank you so much, Jose. Your team is very busy, and I just love how your team is able to consider the interplay between the long-term activities that have been happening in astronomy and the up-and-coming plans for expanding other space activities, including having Earth observation satellites, and as a part of your ongoing work. So thank you for sharing that and making that connection. We're coming toward the end. I'm going to give the panelists an assignment. Please think of a 2-sentence closing comment you'd like to make that summarizes your key message to the audience. I'll come back to you in a few minutes. So I'll ask you to please think of 2 sentences you can give, highlighting either the opportunities or the challenges and the future trends that you see that are important in your work. I just reflect on some of the questions that we brought also from the discussions on Slido. People asked, for example, about the need to connect in situ data to calibrate and validate space-based observations. And we saw that example from Genevieve's presentation, showing that part of our methodology in the project to observe the water hyacinth is to combine or compare data from satellites and drones. We also see the example of the question asking, what are the connections to the Square Kilometre Array project, the radio telescope that's being done both in Australia and South Africa. And I appreciate that Jose was able to mention some comments on that, highlighting that it's another example where they also have the natural laboratory feature. I think it's a great question of, in each of those countries, you see some similar policies where the country is asking, how can they use national policies, whether from the national government as well as universities and other organizations, to ensure that there's local benefit from these major astronomy investments to local communities. I know you can see some great example of that on the Square Kilometre Array organization in their website for Africa, for example. So excellent. I'm going to bring us back to wrap up and think about how we are doing these connections and just prepare for our next event. Just want to remind you that we are doing one more event in this series, and the next discussion on serving society with space data will have our final webinar on Wednesday, 2nd of September. It'll be at the same time, so 10 a.m. Eastern and 4 p.m. Central European time. Because we've been reflecting on individual sustainable development goals, in our final event, we're going to bring together and look at all of the SDGs and go deeply into the topic of monitoring and evaluation, particularly asking the question, because we are moving, of course, into this final decade, the SDGs have a deadline by 2030, what kind of processes are being in place and are improved to do the kind of trackings? We had the question earlier asking, what are the dashboards that are available to monitor the SDGs? Of course, there are many, and it's great to see the regionalized ones that really respond to local topics. I can give the example of the country of Colombia, for example, that does a lot of data collection and documentation of how they're doing at the government scale and also from private side to address the SDGs. So we'll talk more about that and have an initial great panelists in 2 weeks we meet again. So with that in mind, as a reminder, we are thankful to have all the participants today providing your questions on Slido, providing your poll response. And as a reminder, we'll be sending out a survey. So please look for that in your email if you registered for the event. And we'll be asking for your views to collect more information about your observations of how satellite data and other related space tools have contributed or could contribute to SDG number 8 in particular. With this in mind, I want to go back to our panelists and ask you for your closing comments. I will start with Genevieve. What's your 2-sentence closing to help us think about the challenges and opportunities from your experience? Genevieve, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I was so impatient to answer the question. So my takeaway is that space data is accessible to all of us, or it should be made accessible to all industries, be it private organization, government, and that could contribute to improving lives of people on Earth anywhere we are in the world, and it should be accessible, be it a business or otherwise. Thank you.
Wonderful. Let's turn to Jose. Jose, we'd love to have your closing comments. Thank you, Genevieve.
I have 2 ideas. First, I think it's great to explore the interface between disciplines, and there is great opportunity in that interface, in this case, space and astronomy, but Earth observation and astronomy, and also how emerging countries can use their unique natural characteristic, in this case, natural laboratories, to foster their development and to foster different SDGs. We talked about the eight SDG, but foster the other ones also, and how important are institutions in this development. So I think that emerging countries should build strong institutions both to foster that development, but at the same time to protect those unique characteristics.
Thank you so much, Jose. And Bruno, we'll turn to you for the last word. What is your closing reflection on today's discussion?
Wait, I was muted. That was my last word. No. We are living in a world that accelerates towards more digital connections, accelerates more technology, more AI. And I think that has the potential to remove a lot of barriers. So we recognize that talent is equally distributed, but opportunities are not. Let's use this opportunity of the fact that satellites are global, a lot of technologies are global, to also make opportunities equally distributed or more equally distributed.
Those are wonderful and wise words. I can say I've really been inspired to interact with all of you, because we've talked about the key opportunity to say we have this technology which is powerful, but we also want to make sure it's powerful for people of all different backgrounds. We see that there are people living with lots of different initial conditions, where they're born, the opportunities they have in the neighborhood where they live. We've seen inspiring examples from the stories that Genevieve and Jose and Bruno have shared of ways people are using what's ever in their local community to address needs and challenges. So we think that space data is one of the tools, not the only tool, but one tool that we can work to make it more relevant and more accessible, so we can see an increase in decent work, economic growth, and opportunities for everyone to get paid fairly for the work they're doing. Please join us back in 2 weeks as we continue our discussion on serving society with space data. It's really been a pleasure to be with you all, and thank you so much for joining.